Chapter 3. Psychology of Microorganisms. The general theory of evolution is too thoroughly established to require any defense at this time, and it is too well understood to require a treatise on the subject to enable my readers to understand the full import of what I shall have to say in the following pages. The pedigree of physical man is too plainly stamped upon his physical structure to admit of a rational doubt of his descent or ascent from the lower animals. The steps of that ascent are too clearly defined in the structure of the lower animals to admit of a reasonable doubt that the lowest protoplasmic unicellular organism known to science contained the promise and potentiality of physical manhood. Nor is it, in my opinion, open to a rational doubt that the progressive steps required to evolve man from the lowest form of animal life were the result of an intelligent plan, and not of chance, or of a series of fortuitous circumstances. There are three well-defined theories of evolution recognized by science and classified as follows. 1. Materialistic evolution, which denies everything but matter and motion in the evolutionary process. 2. Agnostic evolution, which postulates an unknown and unknowable as the basis and explanation of the process. 3. Theistic evolution, which assumes a God back of all, working out results along the unalterable line of natural law, and by physical forces exclusively. There is another theory held by some, called the development theory, which assumes the orderly unfolding of the system of the universe under divine guidance, according to a divine plan, and with various divine interpositions or special creations. These are standard dictionary definitions, but they are sufficiently explicit for my present purpose. They are mentioned for the purpose of showing that the theory of evolution which I propose to outline differs essentially from any of the recognized classifications. It comes nearer to the definition above given of theistic evolution, but differs from that in not ascribing everything to physical forces exclusively. My hypothesis pertains exclusively to the evolution of animal life and the concomitant psychological development from the monera to man. It assumes a God back of all, working out results along the unalterable line of natural law, but largely by mental or spiritual forces. I accept the general theory of organic evolution in all its fullness, as laid down by materialistic scientists such as Darwin, Haeckel, Romanes, and other great lights, but I shall use their facts, and to some extent their arguments, to demonstrate my psychological theories. That is to say, I shall attempt to show that their facts and their arguments, carried to their legitimate conclusions, demonstrate much more than is dreamed of in their philosophy, that their facts prove just the opposite to their materialistic conclusions, and that, instead of eliminating God from the universe, or relegating him to the domain of the utterly unknowable, they substantiate the essential doctrines of Christianity relating to his attributes and his kinship to humanity the first. In order for consideration will be the evidences which the facts of evolution afford, I, of duality of mind, 2. That the brain is not the organ of the subjective mind, and 3. Of the genesis of the human soul. We will begin with the first appearance of animal life upon this planet. I shall first quote from Haeckel, first, because he is a recognized authority among material scientists, secondly, because he is in some respects superior to Darwin, having written later than that great pioneer in the science, thirdly, because Darwin, in later editions of his works, endorses Haeckel, and fourthly, because the latter distinctly repudiates Christianity and the doctrine of a future life. I cannot, therefore, be accused of selecting my authorities from among those who would endorse my views. He says, if we would now undertake the difficult attempt to discover the phylogenetic course of evolution of these 22 human ancestral stages from the very commencement of life, and if we venture to lift the dark veil which covers the oldest secrets of the organic history of the earth, we must undoubtedly seek the first beginning of life among those wonderful living beings which, under the name of monera, we have already frequently pointed out as the simplest known organisms. They are, at the same time, the simplest conceivable organisms, for their entire body, in its fully developed and freely moving condition, consists merely of a small piece of structureless primitive slime or plasson, of a small fragment of that extraordinarily important nitrogenous carbon compound, which is now universally esteemed the most important material substratum of all the active phenomena of life. Again, he says, the monera are the simplest permanent cytids. Their entire body consists of merely soft, structureless plasson. However thoroughly we examine them with the help of the most delicate reagents and the strongest optical instruments, we yet find that all the parts are completely homogeneous. These monera are, therefore, in the strictest sense of the word, organisms without organs, or even in a strictly philosophical sense, they might not even be called organisms, since they possess no organs. Since they are not composed of various particles, they can only be called organisms insofar as they are capable of exercising the organic phenomena of life, of nutrition, reproduction, sensation, and movement. Here, then, we have the very lowest form of animal life, an organism without organs, a simple mass of plasmin, minus even the nucleus which belongs to the true cell, and therefore absolutely without physical organs. And yet it is endowed with a mind, an organized intelligence. The fact that it adapts means to ends constitutes indubitable evidence that it is carried on a mental process. A living creature is a mind organism, for it is mind, and mind alone, that distinguishes the animate from the inanimate. A cell is a living creature. A cell, therefore, possesses a mind. Unicellular organisms, says Dr. Gates, possess all the different forms of activity to be found in the higher animals. Thus, the simplest cell can transform food into tissue and other metabolic products, and this is the basis of all the nutritive activities and processes of the higher animals. The cell can move parts of itself and is capable of locomotion. And this is the basis of all movement in the higher animals brought about by bones and muscles. The cell can feel a stimulus and respond, and this is the basis of the sensory faculties of the higher animals. The cell can reproduce itself by segmentation, and this is the basis of reproduction in the higher animals. The cell on dividing inherits the actual qualities of its parent mass, and this is the basis of heredity. In short, the cell contains, in simplest form, all of the activities to be found in man. Binet, in his great work, too corroborates all that Dr. Gates alleges, and demonstrates the mistake of those scientists who hold that all acts of microorganisms are due to irritability or reflex action. One of the many phenomena mentioned to show the complexity of the psychic life of microorganisms is the existence of the power of selection, exercised either in the search for food or in the maneuvers attending conjugation. The act of selection is a capital phenomenon. We may take it as the characteristic feature of functions pertaining to the nervous system. As Romanes has indeed observed, the power of choice may be regarded as the criterion of psychical faculties. In his preface to the American edition of his work, Binet remarks, if the existence of psychological phenomena in lower organisms is denied, it will be necessary to assume that these phenomena can be superadded in the course of evolution. In proportion as an organism grows more and more complex, nothing could be more inconsistent with the teaching of general physiology, which shows us that all vital phenomena are previously present in non-differentiated cells. The italics are mind. Binet also quotes a very interesting statement of the observations of Verworn, which reveal the existence of curious instincts among the rhizopods. The Difflugia ampulla, which inhabits a shell formed of particles of sand, emits long pseudopodia which search at the bottom of the water for the materials necessary to construct a new case for the filial organism to which it gives birth by division. The pseudopod, after having touched a particle of sand, contracts, and the grain of sand, adhering to the pseudopod, is seen to pass into the body of the animal. Verworn, instead of grains of sand, placed small fragments of colored glass about the animal. Some time afterwards, he noticed a heap of these fragments on the bottom of the shell. He then saw a bunch of protoplasm issue from the shell, representing the new difflugia produced by division. Thereupon the materials collected by the mother organism, the fragments of colored glass, came forth from the shell and enveloped the body of the new individual in a sheath similar to that encasing the mother. These fragments of glass, loosely interjoined at first, were now cemented together by a substance secreted by the body of the animal. Two facts, continues Binet, are to be remarked in this observation. First, the act whereby the difflugia collects the materials for providing the young individual with a case is an act of preadaptation to an end not present, but remote. This act, therefore, has all the marks of an instinct. Further, the instinct of the difflugia exhibits great precision, for the difflugia not only knows how to distinguish, at the bottom of the water, the materials available for its purpose, but it takes only the quantity of material necessary to enable the young individual to acquire a well-built case. there is never an excess. Psychology of microorganisms. 8.1. It is interesting to note that the difflugia does not act differently from animals possessing more highly complicated organizations and endowed with differentiated nervous systems, as for instance, the larvae of phrygonids which form their sheaths from shells, grains of sand, or minute slivers. Asterisk, I have made these quotations almost at random, not to exhibit any special order of development, but to show that in the very lowest form of animal life, in the simplest organism known to science, from which man can trace his ancestry, there exists a mind of most wonderful complexity and possessing transcendent powers, an instinctive mind. This is the important point to be observed. It is an instinctive mind, as distinguished from merely reflex action. Romanes, in his great work, Mind in the Lower Animals, makes this clear distinction between instinct and reflex action. The most important point to observe in the first instance is that instinct involves mental operations, for this is the only point that serves to distinguish instinctive from reflex action. 2. I have been thus particular in establishing the fact that a mental organism exists in the very lowest forms of animal life, for the reason that I propose to show that this mental organism is the embryonal archetype of the subjective mind in man. That is to say, the subjective mind of man is a direct inheritance from that of the lowest unicellular organism, a change in its essential characteristics save that which is incident to development. The subjective mind of man, therefore, is identical with the instinctive intelligence of animals, differing only in degree of development and complexity of organism. I wish this fact to be distinctly borne in mind, for not only is it the salient fact in the history of organic and mental evolution from the monarch to man, but the inevitable conclusions derivable therefrom are literally of infinite importance. The steps and processes of this development are clearly set forth in the works of such men as Darwin, Romanes, and other great biologists, to whose works the reader is referred for a detailed treatment of the subject. It may be said in general terms, however, that the instinctive intelligence of sentient creatures increases in range and complexity in exact proportion to the evolutionary development of animal life from the lowest to the highest physical organism. That is to say, at each upward step in the phylogenetic series, new instincts are developed to provide for the exigencies of changed environmental relationships. The process is easy to understand. Instincts are divided by Romanes into two classes, namely, primary and secondary. Primary instincts are those natural, spontaneous impulses that move animals, without reasoning, experience, or the intervention of objective intelligence, toward the actions that are essential to their existence, preservation, and development. Secondary instincts are impulses of like character to the above, but were originally intelligent, and by psychology of microorganisms, 83 frequent repetition have become automatic. Such actions, after being performed for a few generations, become as firmly established as the primary instincts, and are then inherited by succeeding generations. These added or secondary instincts are the results of changed environment. That is to say, whenever new dangers are to be guarded against, or new wants are to be supplied, new instincts are developed. Thus, as Romanes points out, the development of firearms, together with the development of sporting interests, has given game of all kinds an instinctive knowledge of what constitutes safe distance / as every sportsman can testify. One Romanes then quotes from a paper on Hereditary Instinct by Andrew Knight, as follows: I have witnessed, within the period above mentioned, of nearly 60 years, a very great change in the habits of the woodcock. In the first part of that time, when it had recently arrived in the autumn, it was very tame. It usually chuckled when disturbed, and took only a very short flight. It is now, and has been during many years, comparatively a very wild bird, which generally rises in silence, and takes a comparatively long flight, excited, I conceive, by increased hereditary fear of man. It has also been noted by sportsmen that game animals keep pace with the increased range and effectiveness of modern firearms. What was a safe distance 50 years ago is within easy range of modern weapons, but game animals have already learned the limits of the new range, and consequently make themselves scarce within its radius. These are but samples of the vast number of illustrations of the principle involved, but they serve to show how new instincts are acquired and old ones modified with every change of environment, and with every step forward in the process of evolutionary development of animal life and intelligence. It is easy to see that, in the course of that development from the monoran to man, the mental organism thus developed must have become wonderfully complex, even before man appeared upon the stage of being. And when we remember that man inherited this already complex mental organism and has since continued to develop it in a constantly increasing ratio, it is easy to understand that a godlike mental organism necessarily resulted. And this we find in the subjective mind of man. Now, there are two things which must be distinctly borne in mind in this connection. The first is that all instincts are transmitted by inheritance from one generation to another, from the lowest to the highest physical and mental organism. This is the shibboleth of science. This is especially insisted upon by those scientists who imagine that a demonstration of its truth eliminates God from the universe. I accept their premises, but not their conclusions, as I shall show hereinafter. I accept their premises because they are demonstrably true. I reject their conclusions because they are demonstrably untrue. It is true that instincts are transmitted by inheritance, and as Darwin, Romanes, and others have clearly shown, it is true of both primary and secondary instincts. Were it not true of primary instincts, animal life would have become extinct before it passed beyond the primordial germ. In the line of development, were it not true of secondary instincts, progressive development would have been confined within very narrow limits, for it was by that means that the species was enabled to profit by the new experiences of individuals, incident to changing environment. Hence it is that the subjective mind of man represents the sum of all the useful instinctive knowledge possessed by its ancestry, near and remote, beginning with the lowest unicellular organism known to science. The second proposition which I desire my readers to bear in mind is that this mental organism began its earthly career millions of years before a brain was evolved in the process of organic evolution. In fact, according to the best authorities, the Archaeolithic period, or primordial epoch, which was the age of skull-less animals, consumed considerably more than one-half of all the years that have elapsed since the advent of organic life on this planet. Thus, Haeckel estimates the comparative length of the Archaeolithic epoch as 53.6% of the whole. During this period, the lowest vertebrates appeared, but a brain was not evolved until a later epoch. It will thus be seen that the primary intelligence of sentient life, the instinctive mind, the mental organism that has since developed into that godlike intelligence which we now recognize as the subjective mind of man, existed and performed its functions with unerring prescience, without the aid of a brain structure, for untold millions of years. We have, therefore, the strongest possible a priori grounds for assuming that the brain is not now, and never has been, the organ of the subjective mind, and if the a posteriori proofs all conspire to confirm that hypothesis, we can safely draw the most momentous conclusions therefrom.